Good afternoon, everyone. I think it's a good follow-up talk after Peter, because I was also going to talk about the importance of measuring plants. And before I start, I would like to acknowledge my colleagues who contributed in different capacities to the work I'm going to share, especially our friends from New South Wales DPI, Guna, Blake, and Andy. I work a little bit in cotton industry, so I think I'll talk. I will use cotton as a case study in this talk. This is the results from a survey, recent survey that is done every year, and what it shows is the effect of soil compaction and what the agronomists and consultants think how it's impacting productivity of the cotton industry. And as you can see, most of the respondents have responded between 1 and 2 bales, between 0 and 2 bales per hectare loss that is occurring. And if you scale it up to the industry, we are looking at $200 to $300 million. Depending on the yield in a year. So it's a huge impact. But I think if you take something positive out of this survey is that industry is well aware. People who are at the helm of managing the affairs on farms, especially agronomists and consultants like yourselves, they are aware of this impact, which means there is a lot of motivation to do something about it. In cotton industry, the main source of compaction are basically these dual tire pickers, and farmers tend to do some sort of controlled traffic farming. But the problem is most of the rows are compacted by this picker, which weighs around like 32 tons. So regardless of you practice CTF or not, most of the rows are being compacted in this picker. They're using this picker. And there is a lot of research that shows that soil needs to be really dry for this picker to not have significant effect. But the reality is the growers are time bound. They need to do the picking. So sometimes it rains, soil is wet. In most of the cases, it has been found that the soil is not dry enough to avoid those damages from related to soil compaction. So in every season, basically, there is some level of compaction that's happening from these cotton pickers. The question is, can we do something about it, or are we doing something about it? Well, I think it's quite challenging because in market that is the only picker that's really available, that is efficient and that farmers can really use. And the only way you can really reduce the effect is to convert it or modify it from dual tire to a single tire. And when you look at another industry survey where the question was asked, well, did growers modify the wheel spacing on their pickers? As you can see, majority of them have said no. And you can't fault the growers for not doing it because it's complicated. I'm not an expert in that area, but I think apparently if you mess up with the machinery, you lose warranties, and there is a huge economic cost to that. And a lot of farmers use contractors, so they don't even use their own machinery. So it's really difficult problem to solve, I suppose, with the way the current market is operating. I would just wanted to talk about a small study that we did where we compared compaction, some rows that were compacted using a tractor that weighed 19 tons versus the ones that were not compacted, and to see if we can connect it to yield and the intermediate processes that affect from when the compaction happens to yield. And again, the purpose of the study wasn't really to replicate exactly what happens, because in field conditions, the compaction occurs at different times than what we did here. But the main purpose was to understand the mechanism of how the compaction affects yield and different components of it. And for comparison, again, as I said earlier, the cotton picker weighs 32 tons. So we only used 19 tons with that tractor, putting a water tank on it. And we compacted both sides of the rows to see how that affects. And we looked at different soil and plant parameters, including soil strength, soil water, and stress in the plants. This graph is showing volumetric water content at different depths. On the right-hand side, you can see 0.1 meter, that's 10 centimeters, and goes all the way up to 80 centimeters. And the red line is basically the compacted, and the control is the non-compacted one. And I just wanted to focus on here, and I think Peter also mentioned where a lot of the water use happens is around that 0.4 meter depth. And you can see there the red line. If you look at the red line, especially in the start, there is water available, but it's not being used. And when you look at the green line, the water is being drawn by the crop, then it's being refilled when there is an irrigation or rain. But we don't see that in that red line, which is the compacted soil. It starts to recover later, but again, it never comes back to being the same as the non-compacted soil. Now, from soil physics point of view, that water is available in that red line if you look at the soil probe data, but crop is not using it. So from farmer's perspective, I suppose the water is sitting there, but it is not available to crop. So technically it's not available. Another point I wanted to make was if you go to the next layer again, 0.6, there is still that difference, but there is very low use of water. And again, at 0.8 meter, there is hardly any. Now, there can be two reasons for this. One, either we are irrigating too frequently, so the crop doesn't feel the need to send its roots to the deeper layers, or there is, regardless of the treatments that we applied here, basically all soils are compacted at that depth. So it's hard for crops roots to get to that depth. And then we converted this data into soil water recharge, cumulative soil water recharge, and crop water use. And again, I want to just focus on this depth where we saw the worst effect of compaction is around that 0.3 to 0.5 meter depth, or 30 to 50 centimeter depth. Again, the top one is showing soil water recharge that occurs because of irrigation and rainfall. And the bottom one is showing the crop water use that crop draws. And as you can see, they both mirror each other. And just at this depth, there is at least 100 millimeter difference between the two treatments here. Now, why is it affecting soil water recharge? Because compaction potentially creates a barrier, a physical barrier. And then when we apply an irrigation or rainfall happens, most of it goes in a runoff, basically it's wasted. But if the soil is not compacted, it allows soil to infiltrate into deeper layers and is recharged better. And then how soil compaction affects crop water use is, again, roots, because of that barriers, roots can't go deep inside. So they are stuck in that top 30, 40 centimeter. But how does it affect the plants? So this is a measurement of a plant using a canopy temperature sensor. So this is an infrared sensor that is non-contact and looked at the plant continuously, gives you reading every 5 minutes. And you can see that that effect in soil water actually translated into crop water stress and affected the crop. And that's a very clear measure we can take from the plants to study the response of the plant, because as Peter said, plant is an integrator of what's happening in the environment, and that's the direct response of the plants to what's happening under the ground. But why does it matter? Because in the end, we lost 27% yield. And there are different aspects of plant measurements or plant development measurement, but the balls, is the D in the bottom right corner is the one that's important, because balls are the ones, the final fruit that develops and that converts into yield. As you can see, there's a big difference in how many balls were left in the end and the yield they produced. Now that brings again to the question of how do you really know where my available water is in the soil? Because there are so many factors that can affect it. So this, for example, is an example from cotton. In cotton industry, farmers use different types of row configurations, and these are the three most popular ones. On the first bottom left, you can see that's called a solid row configuration, or 1 meter. So there is a spacing of 1 meter between rows. Then single skip, where you have 2 planted rows and 1 you skip, and then 2 meter, where you kind of skip every second row. And the top one is the figure is showing a thermal image, and you can see there on the left side is more plants, it draws more water, and it runs out of water quickly as well. So now, where do I put my soil probe really in these kind of 3-row configurations? Because the one of the challenges in trying to make a decision based on only soil probe is that we don't know where the roots are, especially in those skip row configurations. We don't know where the roots are, so we don't know our soil bucket. And if I don't know my soil bucket, that means I don't know my plant available water capacity, basically. And sorry, I'll move this a little bit away. Sorry. So this is why we are coming back to saying why it's important to monitor the plants directly, because if there are any issues, and again, it's not saying at all that monitoring soil water is not important. I think it's really fundamental and the most important measurement, if you ask me, the soil water. But the point I'm trying to make is, in many situations, that information is not sufficient, or it doesn't give us the full picture when we are making the important irrigation decisions. And this is, which is why we think the measuring the plant or the response of plant to how we irrigate is important. So again, this is a canopy temperature data from a cotton crop, and you can see this is the diurnal pattern, and the blue is the irrigated, and red is the water stressed one. And when you look at this blue line, you can see it's trying to, when it's the hottest period of the day, it's trying to hover around that 29, 30. And we know from a lot of research that that's when it performs best. And it's trying to reduce, stay in that range. And it manages to do that through releasing the heat load when it opens its stomata. And when it opens the stomata, it's also takes up carbon dioxide through photosynthesis, so it helps growth as well. But when there is lack of water availability, it shuts down its stomata to conserve water, and that's when, because it can't lose its heat, it heats up, and that's the pattern you're seeing in that diurnal picture. And when when the stomata are closed, basically it also means it can't do its photosynthesis. So it can't absorb CO2, it can't grow. Basically, the whole function slows down. And this graph then shows how that canopy temperature or leaf temperature is related to growth or photosynthesis. As you can see here, when it has enough water, it tries to stay in that 29 to 30 degree canopy temperature or leaf temperature, and that's when the photosynthesis is maximum. And then as the canopy temperature increases, the photosynthesis also goes down. So in a way, the canopy temperature measurement is directly related to water stress as well as the growth of the plant. So again, it's an integrator, it integrates the effect of different environmental factors. And coming back to how the question of why do we care? And because it's related to yield. And this graph is showing the canopy temperature on the x-axis and yield on the y-axis, and it's showing it for 3 different row configurations. As you can see, there is quite a strong relationship for all of these 3 row configurations. So regardless of where my available water is, I can actually see the response in the plant by measuring the canopy temperature. And just quickly showing how that this is how we think should be done. So this is, I just took a screenshot from Guna. I think Tim will talk about it more, but I just wanted to quickly show the top graph is showing the soil water, and the bottom one is showing the canopy temperature. And this in the top graph, the dotted red line is where it's a trigger point for a crop, for a grower. So as you can see, it's being triggered whenever it reaches that point. But how the crop is responding to it, you can look at the canopy temperature data in the bottom graph, and the horizontal red line is when we recommend an irrigation. As you can see, you can identify the spots where you might have gone early or you might have delayed an irrigation based on the response of the plant. And then that means it allows you to adjust your deficits up there. So instead of working on a fixed deficit, you can actually make it dynamic based on how your plant is responding. Because again, there is just so many factors that affect your root development. If it's we've seen in the data, if it's a wet early season, the roots don't develop because they don't need to. There is so much water available in the top. And then when the peak flowering arrives, if we just follow this kind of irrigation regime where we say, okay, if it hits that deficit, I'm going to do it, we are potentially going to stress the crop because the root is not developed and we are asking it to use the water from 40 centimeter, but the root is not there. So it's good to see both at what's happening under the ground, but also how the plants are responding to really get a true picture of it. And I think, so I just wanted to acknowledge CRDC for funding and thank you for listening. That's all. Thanks.